Thanks for joining me here on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, the founder of Bare Bones Yoga and the creator of the Momentum Magic Method, the way to become a confident yoga teacher who seamlessly shares cues and easily creates sequences, whose classes are transformational, not just transactions, who understands anatomy and who shares their passion in a unique and authentic way. Here on the podcast, you'll hear anatomy lessons, stories from teachers, interviews with others in the field, and a dose of personal growth because having a strong, healthy mindset is such an important piece of being a confident teacher. In addition to the podcast, follow me on Instagram and TikTok for daily videos on teaching topics, and I've got 2 more ways you can build your confidence and skill. Join me weekly for my mini masterclass and teaching clinic, a 30-minute teacher-only themed yoga class, followed by a teaching lesson. Just DM me the words masterclass invite. And I'm also excited to tell you about my new invitation-only group called the Empowerment Club, an exclusive community for yoga teachers who want to feel confident and make a bigger impact. Membership is free and includes weekly workshops, private audio lessons, private Facebook group, and special offers on programs. DM me the words Empowerment Club for your application. Thanks for taking the time to listen today. Hi there. Welcome to Conversations for Yoga Teachers. I'm your host, Karen Fabian, and this is episode 285. Oh my goodness, we are inching closer to 300 episodes. Unbelievable. So I am recording this on March 7th, 2024, and I had the opportunity yesterday to connect with a friend of mine, Lisa Marie Rankin. And so today's episode, surprise, is going to be a guest interview. And I'm so excited to share this with you. This is the second time Lisa has been on the show. And in a moment, I'm just going to give you a brief recap of her background and her bio, and then we're going to launch right into the episode. Before I do that, though, I just want to tell you one small thing, and then we'll get into Lisa's intro and the episode itself, the conversation I had with her. I want to tell you about a new training that I'm going to be starting on March 25th, and it's all about helping you tap into that innate quality that only you have, that you absolutely want to call forth when you are teaching. And I call it the it factor. There's a lot more to this, but I want you to just imagine when you go to a yoga class and you feel like the teacher just has it all together. You feel like she's confident, she's empowered, she's teaching from that place where she's showing up authentically as herself. There's an excitement in the room. The students hang out afterwards and ask her questions. She confidently walks through the room. She just unapologetically is herself. This is what I call the it factor when it applies to being a yoga teacher. And you absolutely have this quality in yourself. And it's just a matter of discovering how you can call this forth. I've spent the past couple of weeks pulling this together because I'm so inspired by not only the teachers that I'm working with that are doing this sort of work, but also in examining the things that I've tapped into that have helped me build connections with my students and grow my business. And so I want to share this training with you so you can also discover this quality that you have in yourself and how to step into your power when you are teaching. So to find out more about the It Factor training that starts on March 25th, all you need to do is send me a DM with the words It Factor, and I'll tell you all about it. So let's get into this conversation with Lisa Marie Rankin. Lisa Marie is an amazing person. She and I go way back because we both practiced at the same studio here in Boston way back in the day. And I'm so excited to have opportunity to reconnect with her. She has been on my podcast before when her book came out. So let me just tell you, because this is now obviously her second appearance, a little bit about her. Lisa Marie Rankin holds an MBA and an MS from Bentley University. Several years ago, she decided to follow the path of the goddess, leaving her job in the corporate world to pursue her passion for writing and teaching yoga, meditation, and spirituality. As an advocate for women's health, happiness, and spirit, she teaches women to reconnect with their bodies, prioritize pleasure, and rely on their inner wisdom in order to become goddesses. She also has a background in Ayurvedic training, and we talk a little bit about that as well. I reconnected with Lisa recently because she is going to be hosting a training that she's going to tell you a little bit about. And more importantly, in a way, she has this background in helping women tap into these different parts of themselves that can really help them feel more confident and empowered. So this actually goes really well with the conversation I just had with you about the it factor. And at the same time, the conversation with Lisa stands on its own and absolutely should be viewed that way. So I'm not going to go into more to share. I want you to experience this fully. This is a really energizing conversation and one that I hope really inspires you. Keep in mind as well that throughout the episode, a couple of times we mentioned not only Lisa's book, which you can get on Amazon. She talks about that in the interview, but also how to access her very special training coming up in March. So with that, I welcome you to this episode, to this conversation, and let's go to that conversation I had with Lisa. Hi there.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm trying to put my little do not disturb on.
Yes, I am so excited to have this conversation, and I feel like the universe is just conspiring to set us up to have this talk because of a whole bunch of little conversations I've had since you and I chatted the other day about getting together. So I have a lot, even more ideas of things I want to ask you about when when we're talking today. So maybe a good place to start is, why don't you start out by sharing a little bit about you and the work you do? That might sort of set the stage for kind of going into some of what we talked about prior to this call, prior to this recording going into.
Sure. You want me just to start?
Yeah. Yeah. So just, just because I think for people listening, like some of them may recall when you were on the show before, which I think was over a year ago. So you're probably doing some newer things, and maybe just to catch some people who haven't heard that episode. So just, we'll just kind of start at that beginning point, and then we can take it into some specific directions.
Okay, perfect. So
Yeah.
right now, I am an author, teacher, and an Ayurvedic wellness coach. And I say right now because for most of my life, similar to you, I think I was in the corporate world, but I was always very interested in yoga and spirituality. And there was always like something calling me to do more of that. And around 39, and it's funny, I think that a lot of things seem to shift for women when they turn 40. I was in a marriage that was sort of falling apart. We got separated and divorced, but I also started looking at like, what am I really doing with my life? And I decided to take a sabbatical from work. And I had a really good corporate job where, I made a lot of money. So by most standards, but it wasn't inspiring me anymore. And something else was calling me. So I decided to, just take a little bit of a break. I was just going to take a 6-month sabbatical just to kind of collect myself, spend time with children. And during that time, I started to write a blog, and I had never written a blog before, and it was about goddesses and goddess archetypes. And it's interesting because I think that this just following your little ideas that you have is very important, because I had no reason to start a blog about goddesses. I don't even remember, thinking all that much about goddesses, but I'm like, I'm going to start a blog. And I started writing about how these goddesses, how I felt their energy, their present in some like pivotal times of my life. So I started talking about my divorce and the Hindu goddess Kali, who's the goddess of breaking through the status quo and transformation. And, how I was feeling financially with the Hindu goddess Lakshmi, or Aphrodite, was I was starting to date again in my 40s. So I was looking at these different goddess archetypes to help make sense of the situations in my life, but also help me with a path forward, because I love working with archetypes. And, often people will ask me like, well, is it a goddess or an archetype? And it's both. And Carl Jung, this famed Swiss psychoanalyst, has this beautiful quote where he says, "The world of gods and spirits is truly nothing but the collective unconscious within me." So in this effort of writing about the different goddesses, I started to realize that we have all these different aspects inside of ourselves. And that's why we can look at like Hindu goddesses or Greek goddesses, African goddesses, and they have a similar cast of characters. They have priestesses, they have maidens, they have mothers, they have warriors, they have all of these different aspects. And that's because even though we are separated by geography or religion, we share a common humanity. So these are elements that live within all of us. So I just, as I started to go deeper and deeper, really, I wanted to do more with it. I was like, this is a whole new way, instead of looking at either personal development or spiritual growth, where it's less about, oh, I need to fix this part of me. This part is insecure. This part is, jealous, or this part is always like self-sabotaging. But what part do you need to develop, right? Because we have these different parts. So for example, like if you're struggling with anxious attachment, right? It's like, okay, well, how do I learn to reparent myself? How do I cultivate that inner mother or even that inner father as well? So it's less about contraction or fixing, but more about expansion. So I really just kind of dove into the world of archetypes and personal development, spiritual growth. And then I got a book deal. So it was called The Goddess Solution, which was all about how women could take inspiration from ancient goddesses and apply it to their modern lives. And that's really one of the key things that I try to do, is make like ancient wisdom or, somewhat esoteric or complicated things very applicable to our modern days. Like, how do we approach, how can we use this to start a new business, to end a relationship, begin a relationship, have a better sex life? There's all of this wisdom that is already packed in that provides us with a roadmap of a way of being. So needless to say, I never went back into the corporate world. I really just dove headlong into this. I became an Ayurvedic wellness coach. I started creating these programs for women to really help heal, nourish their body, and take more control and just have them feel empowered, kind of moving from victim consciousness, as far as like things are just happening to me that are out of my control, to I'm creating my reality moment by moment with my thoughts, with my words, with my actions. So kind of really taking that power back.
Got it. Yes. And now I'm remembering, because the last time we talked, it was right around when your book was coming out, or it had just been out for a little while. And I have it and I love it. And I love this whole idea of, I wrote down a note when you said common humanity. I love that whole idea that from all these different disciplines and not necessarily religions, but history areas, we can pull some common threads. And I also love when you said this idea of, rather than looking at what we need to give up, what do we need to develop? And I know for a lot of people listening who are yoga teachers, they tend to look at what they're not doing right. And that's like the inner critic raging, versus what's the part of me that I need to fuel so that I can bring more of that into how I show up as a teacher. So absolutely, now it's all kind of coming back to my mind. So since you released the book, when you and I got together on the podcast the last time, tell me what kind of work have you been doing with women around implementing these ideas and these, archetypes into their lives?
Sure. So one of them is just learning about archetypes. So I have a Divine Feminine Mystery School. It's enlivened, where we connect as women several times throughout the month. And one of the times is to do full moon goddess circles. We'll look at the different goddess archetypes. So for example, we've recently looked at Aphrodite, as we were talking about masculine and feminine polarities in relationships and also within us. So starting to learn about their myths, but then applying it, like, well, where do I find this archetype in me, or where do I need to develop it? So we do that in full moon goddess circles, and also looking at different like feminine practices and principles. And like, what I mean by that is like, we'll look at like, let's look at the sister wound, right? Like, why is it that women are sometimes nervous about collaborating or working together? There's that sense of competitiveness. How is that holding us back? Where did it come from? Or healing the mother wound. Like, what is the mother wound keeping us from doing that we really want to do, but we're nervous that we might not get our mother's love if we actually go do it, or the father wound as well. So look at all of these. So it's really inner work, but again, it's a sense of like, how do we reclaim the feminine through, caring for our body, looking at these different archetypes for this sense of expansion, and connecting with sisters and community to heal that sister wound. And there's this beautiful quote by Michaela Boehm, who wrote The Wild Woman's Way. She's like, we learn from other women by being with other women, right? We can't just read books on it. We actually have to connect. We have to gather. We have to hear different perspectives. So that has really been my focus, as well as my Ayurveda program, where we really focus on caring for like the feminine body. And it's much more of a spiritual practice than just, a list of biohacks that you want to check off your list, but really, how do we honor that inner divinity within us?
Got it. That's amazing. And I can imagine when you get a group of women together with this framework overlaying and structuring the conversation, it must be really interesting in terms of the things that come out and the ways that women transform.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing and it's fascinating. Like, we were recently reading Pussy, a Reclamation by Regina Thomasauer. And, I go into the discussion, think it's going to be this lighthearted discussion where we're going to be talking about like sex and desire and relationships. And it gets so much deeper about like, what were we taught about being a woman? What were we taught about our body? What were we taught about sex? Was sex for us or was it for others? And, it was so interesting that the conversation just kind of took a much deeper turn than I had even envisioned for it, but it was just so beautiful.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I sort of hear this like common thread in everything you're saying as sort of a reclaiming of our most empowered way of being and sort of breaking out of some beliefs that we might have about ourselves as women that were superimposed on our brains before we even had the conscious choice to accept these ways of thinking.
Exactly. And I love that word reclaim. And I also love the word remember, because I always say, like, as we're learning some of this stuff, sometimes it's less about learning, feeling like you're learning something new, but it's like a remembering. It's like, oh, well, of course, that was my belief because it's what I had learned. But now how can I shift that to one that is more empowering to me? And like, how can I reclaim that power? Like, again, as women, we're pretty powerful. We're magical, but I feel like for somewhere along the way, we forgot about that. So part of that is that remembering.
Yeah, and this is why it's so pivotal that we're connecting when we are, and we're having this particular conversation when we are, because a lot of the focus that I'm finding when I'm working with teachers in my program is that this whole theme of reclaiming and being more empowered and tapping into our authentic way of being as a yoga teacher, as we express that through the art of teaching yoga, is coming up in lots of different ways for the teachers that I'm working with. And one of the common themes that I'm hearing, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this and seeing if this is a theme that you hear in your group, is the feeling of guilt. And it can be tied to a mother feeling guilty doing something for herself because of her relationship with her kids and thinking that it means she can't be there for her kids, or a woman feeling guilty, sort of reclaiming her most empowered way of being because her husband is supporting her in some way, which isn't a bad thing. It's just the way their family unit runs. And she's interpreting the support she's getting from her husband as something that she should feel guilty about because she grew up in a family where money wasn't plentiful. And so she had limiting beliefs about money as a child. So now she maybe feels some guilt around accepting money from her husband in the course of just the day-to-day running of their family, even though the husband is super glad that that mom can be home for the kids while he goes to work, and he loves that she has all that under control and he sees a value to that. But in her mind, she's twisted it from it being a value to feeling guilty because she's not supporting herself, which she ties to the past beliefs that she assumed from her family. And all of it results in her not showing up in a way that's most empowered. Like I almost think of it like instead of Wonder Woman with the cape on, she's like sort of crouched in the corner, like, but she's trying. It's almost like the tulip is trying to, what is that? That fave, like the bud that hasn't, what's that poetry? Aeneas Nin, like the bud, like,
It hurts too much to stay contracted that.
yes, something like that. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
not that she's cowering in the corner and all hope is lost. It's that she sees there's a more empowered way of being. And she has to sort of like the chick breaking through the egg. She has to break through all of these learned behaviors and beliefs so that she can access that superpower part of her.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, does this theme of like guilt come up in these sorts of ways with the people that you work with?
oh, most definitely. I mean, I think women have so much guilt, right? I mean, there's guilt for, there's guilt for staying home with the children and not making money. There's guilt for going to work and not staying home for the money. There's a guilt for, getting married. There's a guilt for not getting married, no matter, right? Like, so there's so much unraveling that we need to do. So part of like is responding to your question, I would suggest that women take another perspective when it's saying guilt, like, oh, should I really be leaving my kids, or should I really be doing this and letting my husband support me? So one of our feminine superpowers is our desire, and that's really like, and if we can look at the masculine and feminine, like internally, we can look at it externally, but it's a feminine desire that activates the masculine, and we have both within us. And I guess what I'm trying to say, like, if there's a desire to teach a yoga class and become a yoga teacher, that's like a gift from the divine. That's something that you were supposed to do. The reason that you have that desire is because there's a part of you that wants to emerge, that you are being called to step into a bigger space. So by not doing that, you're actually doing a disservice to everybody around you, including your kids, including your husband, including the students that need you, because you wouldn't have had the idea. It just wouldn't have come up. So thinking about the desire is less that, oh, this is selfish that I'm following my desires, but it's actually your divine duty as a woman to kind of keep yourself like engaged, to kind of follow, to pursue those desires, because then you are becoming more expansive and you're creating a halo effect for everyone around you as well, too. So to me, it's like, the guilt, the cowering is really the more selfish part, because you're not gifting your superpowers to the people who need them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And when you said teaching is a gift from the divine, it's so true, because there is something built into teaching yoga that it really triggers us to face a lot of our fears just by the act of standing in front of a room of people we don't really know, and teaching this thousands of year old practice. So there's something different from like personal training or Pilates or jazzercise or aerobics. There's something about teaching yoga that can be, and I'm certainly speaking from my own personal experience, but also from people that I've worked with in my program, very triggering at a very base level. Like, I don't want to be seen. I'm afraid to use my voice. I'm afraid to hold myself out as someone who knows how to do this. And so I find it, when you said teaching is a gift from the divine, I really love that you emphasize that, because I feel like it sort of gives the yoga teacher something to compare that feeling that's fear-based to. It's like, hey, look, like I remember one time Brene Brown said something about when she was getting a whole bunch of hate about something she put out there, the vulnerability talk or whatever the TED talk was she did. And she said something like, and I think this is a common phrase, like, unless you're here in the arena with me, you don't qualify to criticize me. Like, unless you're also an entrepreneur or you're also a yoga teacher, and it's interesting to overlay that as well, because I think yoga teachers are very hard on themselves and they don't give themselves credit. Like, not everybody is raising their hand and saying, hey, I would love, I mean, how many people are terrified to do public speaking? That's one of the top things that people say they're afraid of doing, moving and public speaking and all sorts of things. And you're volunteering to do this thing that involves essentially public speaking. So I just love that you say that. So maybe a good place for us to go, and you tell me if this sort of matches up with when we talked before, kind of the thought process we had. Would it be helpful for us to talk a little bit about some of the different archetypes or some of the different personas? I don't know what we want to call them, to give people an idea of, like I said, Wonder Woman before. That's really silly because we're obviously talking about more elevated archetypes than Wonder Woman.
Not actually, she's a great archetype. That's like warrior archetype.
So would that be a good place to go at this point, to kind of go through a little bit of what these types look like?
Yeah, and definitely. And there's just one thing that you just said that I just want to quickly just kind of highlight is that, you mentioned like not everybody is standing up to, teach a yoga class. Public speaking is so feared. So I think one part for people who are having the fears is have compassion. Like, yes, I mean, you're putting yourself up in front, in front of a group of people. Of course, it's going to be a little scary. And, and you're being called to do it. And there's this book called Playing Big by Tara Moore. And she talks about like fear, like we get nervous, we want to cower for fear. But when we actually see fear as like this invitation to start taking up more space, to actually become more expansive, we can start to walk in that way. It almost gives us like a little beacon, like, oh, this is going to help me grow. I'm going to become a different and a more evolved person by doing these things that don't always feel good. So it's kind of like a two-part. One, have compassion, of course. Yeah, we're tribal creatures. We're not, to stand up in front of a group of people is a little scary. Yeah. And there's growth in that fear.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I think generally people are typically hard on themselves. And I think yoga teachers in particular, because they have that experience of, I just taught a class. So now their brain has ample stuff to nitpick. And so that inner critic, well, I mean, we're talking about personas, a negative persona of the inner critic has a lot to chomp on when you're done teaching that class and you have that opportunity to listen to that inner critic instead of what you're saying, which is to really be compassionate with yourself and to say, hey, look, I'm stepping up in the arena to be this guide for other people. And on some level, like that's enough, like that checks the box.
It does. And to celebrate yourself after you do it. None of us do that enough. We do these things. And then instead of saying like, wow, great job. You just got in front of people, you taught a class. That's fantastic. It's like, I missed it. I should have said it this way. And we start to ruminate. So I think another thing too is really taking time to celebrate. And even if things didn't go your way, you did. There is still so much more to celebrate. And I think that helps to start rewire that negativity bias that we have.
Yes. I honestly, myself included, I don't remember really any yoga class when I left saying, oh, pat on the back, Karen, that was fantastic. I mean, there probably were a handful, maybe I don't remember. It's just so much easier and so much more conditioned to critique. And a lot of that can come from the way we were raised, the scenario that maybe we had when we were in school and how our parents looked at our grades. And then we bring that mindset to teaching yoga, which is a totally different academically framed mindset, totally different framework to overlay on top of a yoga class. And quite honestly, even when yoga teachers get quote unquote supervised by mentors and get quote unquote feedback, and the reason I'm quoting is because feedback, in my opinion, is really just someone's opinion about how you did. And there really is no right or wrong, but so many teachers, unfortunately, take the feedback personally and can't do what you're saying. They can't give themselves compassion and give themselves credit because they're being evaluated maybe in a system where they're getting feedback that's giving their inner critic more fuel than the other part of them.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't let's dive into some of these archetypes so people can get a sense. And of course, I want to remind them that in your book, which I have, there's a chapter dedicated to each one. So as you're talking and people are listening, if this is really like juicy, jazzy content for them, go get the book. And you can say at the end where people can get it. So obviously on all the places, but we can reiterate the name of the book, because I think this little snippet may spark some people's thoughts like, oh, I want to learn more about this. So go ahead, tell us what comes to mind for some of these.
Great. So when I'm thinking of like, in getting out of that critical thinking mind and kind of taking up a bigger space, and specific in like teaching a yoga class, I think archetypes can be just an amazing way to think about like, okay, what's a part of me that maybe has been dormant, but I want to start building, that I want to call online. And I think there's a few that you could use depending on the type of class that you want to teach. Like, so one is the priestess, right? So the priestess is this beautiful divine feminine archetype. She helps to navigate the underworld and the topside world. She helps to expand consciousness. So if someone's class is a more spiritually inclined class, like it might be the priestess archetype that you look at. And one of the ways that we can work with archetypes, well, we can learn about them. You could learn about the different goddesses. Like I think of the goddess Inanna or Mary Magdalene as like the priestess archetypes, kind of understanding their story, and then just feeling into it. Like, how does it feel to be the priestess? Like, what does that look like? Spend some time visualizing that. Like if I go into my yoga class as the priestess, like, how do I stand? What's my opening salutation? Like, how am I going to end it? So really kind of embodying that. So that would be for like a more like spiritually inclined yoga class. But if one is more focused on health, it's like maybe you're the healer. You are looking to heal somebody's body. How does the healer interact? And maybe that's like a more grounding practice. Maybe there's more touch involved. But what would you do as like the healer or the medicine woman, helping somebody come back into their body and to also to improve it from any of the ailments that they have? We could also even look at like a coach. Now, a coach isn't like a divine feminine archetype that we're going to see, but there's thousands of archetypes. And the coach is, I'm going to help someone become a better version of themselves. I'm going to challenge them while also giving them encouragement. So thinking about the different archetypes, or the creatrix, maybe you just want to create like a really amazing experience and you have a specific playlist that you're going to do, and you have moves that are going to go to the different songs, and you want to create just this beautiful experience. So you can start to think of like your goals for the yoga class, and then what type of archetype would really be able to help achieve those goals. And remember, it's not, I always like to tell the women that I'm working with when we're talking about archetypes, because sometimes people will be like, well, that's so inauthentic. Like, I don't really feel like a priestess. I've never gotten priestess training. And first of all, you know enough. So also that should be a mantra too. Like, whatever I know is enough. It's exactly what my people need. But just remembering that these are all parts of you, and they're going to get stronger and stronger the more you work with them. You're going to develop them. Just like if you had weak biceps, I always use this kind of analogy. It's not inauthentic to go to the gym and work your biceps. You're getting stronger. And that's what we do with the archetypes as well too, by considering them, the qualities, the characteristics, how they appear in us. We're bringing it online. And one thing that I really think is beautiful about working with archetypes, like if there's an archetype you have in mind, whether it's like the creatrix or the healer, just the fact that you have it in mind is a sign that it wants to emerge within you. So like what Rumi said, what you seek is seeking you, because there'd be no resonance if you didn't. You just wouldn't have thought of it. So even the fact that you're like, oh, this is a persona, or this is an energy or mode of behavior that I want to cultivate, means that it wants you to cultivate it too. So there's like this beautiful synergy within that as well.
Yes. Okay. And I love that, because I think as much as I'm science-based, I also love the energetics, and I love the idea of there was something in your frequency at the time that caused the universe to give you that spiritual download or connection to the archetype. So it's almost like you have a requirement to follow up on it. So the one thing that I'm wondering as you're talking, and you sort of alluded to this, and I want to sort of flesh this out a little more. One of the things that I really focus on when I work with teachers is helping them sort of identify and own and tap into their authentic way of being a yoga teacher. And everything that you were mentioning before about, are you assisting? Are you walking around the room? And getting really concrete about what does your way of teaching look like? And what are the feelings you have when you're teaching in that way? And that, like, almost from a marketing and branding standpoint, becomes the way you create your own teaching method, which is driven by your mission, which goes along with messaging and helps you build momentum. Like, I have a whole framework there from like a business development side, but it's almost more built on this central idea that we're talking about, which is showing up authentically. And so part of what I'm wondering is, in the exploration of these different avatars or archetypes, how do you still be in, and this is sort of what you alluded to, but I want to dive in a little more. How do you still like nurture your authentic way and also leverage some of what attracts you to these different archetypes?
Sure. No, that's a great question. And for me, I mean, I think authenticity is like ever evolving because we're
Yeah.
changing every single day as well, too.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we don't want to put on airs or have like our a teacher that we liked voice and try to act like them. We really want to find our own way. So
Right.
one thing is the archetypes are going to emerge differently in all of us. Like you and I could both have an intention of, I am going to go in to a yoga studio with the priestess archetype, but it's going to be different. So part of that is visualizing like, okay, what does that mean to you? And not necessarily looking like to see how it's manifesting in others, but what does it mean to you to be a priestess? Like, and if your role is as a spiritual guide and helping people tap into their psyche and their shadow parts, like, how does that feel? And how would you do that? So the manifestation is going to be different for everyone, but we can kind of think of like the energy and the goals of the archetype and like, okay, how am I going to step into that?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. It's kind of like I can have brown eyes and somebody else can have brown eyes, but my brown eyes look like mine, even though we have the same literal color. It's like, it's still our unique characteristics. Yeah, no, I definitely, and I like when you said before, I kind of think of it almost like spices, like all the different archetypes are like a different spice, and you're sort of deciding as the person what spices you want to sprinkle on yourself that resonate with you, that kind of amplify the parts of you that you want to amplify.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm wondering, and this sort of relates to what we mentioned before, is for someone who, maybe has a conscious level of awareness of being drawn to really wanting to step more into her more authentic way of being. She wants to step more into her role as, if we're talking about a yoga teacher, really showing up as herself, really feeling more confident and empowered. But she has these past experiences where it hasn't worked out. She has maybe some limiting beliefs that are saying in the back of her mind, oh, like you said, you're not ready, you're not qualified, you don't have enough experience, or whatever the story is. How does she begin to move forward in that way?
Yeah, great question. And so first, I think just to recognize, because I think that sometimes people think like, oh, it's just me that has so much self-doubt. It's just everyone else has this figured out. That is
True.
not the case.
Yeah.
Everybody has self-doubt. And, even 5 years after you're feeling very comfortable, you're gonna have self-doubt about something else, right? Like, so it's a perpetual thing. And I think it's important to recognize that because you don't take it so seriously. Like, okay, this is just part of being human, that I am going to question the things that I do. So having compassion for that self. And you said it earlier, and I can't remember in what context, but one thing I would really recommend people doing, and especially like if you're visualizing like the archetypes, visualizing the classes, think of the teacher that you want to be in 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Like we always have to look at to where we want to go as opposed to like what had happened in the past. Like I learned how to ride a bicycle pretty like late in life. And I remember there's this little boardwalk that I was trying to get over. Wasn't that little, it was really wide, but for some reason I kept falling off. And then finally, someone's like, just look at where you do want to go. Stop looking at where you don't.
Right.
And I was
Right.
like, oh, and I feel like life is a lot like that as well,
Yeah.
too. So let your desire for what you want be stronger than your fears of what had happened in the past,
Mhm.
I would say, and kind of be looking towards that future self. How do you set your future self up for success?
Yeah, I almost feel like too, when you were just describing the situation, like I feel like you have to sort of build a level of tolerance for discomfort, because like you said, like I sometimes hear that phrase new level, new devil. When you're up leveling,
Mhm.
there's always that level of discomfort, similar to what you were saying. And I feel like sometimes, and in speaking for myself here, when I feel that discomfort, it's so much easier to go back to the old way, because even though that's not the place I want to be, there's not the same level of discomfort there as the discomfort I feel when I try to up level. So I'm trying to get more comfortable with that kind of discomfort versus accepting the discomfort that comes with not up leveling. That's just sort of that dull frequency that's kind of there. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, totally agree. And actually, one of the things that I talk to a lot of like my clients and students about too, and I don't know if this is going to translate as well in a podcast, but the quadrant of the learning cycles where you go into something and you have this like unconscious, like
Yeah,
what is it? Unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you're doing, but you also don't even know. So you're just like, sure, I'll
right,
start a business. Sure, I'll become a yoga teacher. This is a great
right,
idea. And then you realize how much there is to actually learn and to know.
right,
And this
right,
is the conscious incompetence. You
right,
actually realize that you don't know as much as you need to know.
right.
And it's not a good feeling, but the only way out is through, right? And so it's like, so what you're saying is like, I can be comfortable in the discomfort. So just knowing that, yeah, this is the phase that I'm in. I'm learning, I'm growing. It doesn't feel great all the time, but for me, to get to where I want to be, it's just a phase that I'm going to have to enter.
Yeah, no, and I love that framework. And I think about that a lot when there is that opportunity for a yoga teacher to sort of take on something new. It's going back in that framework to now I'm consciously incompetent again, when maybe I was doing something and feeling like things were operating at full steam. But that, as you say, is part of growth, is that you're kind of, it's not so much taking a step back, but you're in that mode of like beginner's mind again. And there's a lot of beauty in being in that place, and if you're never in beginner's mind again, then you're probably not growing.
Right. And you're probably not challenging yourself and you're
Yeah,
gonna feel like
totally.
you're gonna feel a little stuck. So
Totally,
yeah.
totally. I remember somebody said something recently on either a video I saw or a podcast, and she said, when you look back at yourself even a month ago, I hope that you have on some level a different way of being today than you had even just a month ago. And it could be something small, it could be something big, but it's just an illustration that you are continuing to nudge yourself forward. Uh, and I think for a lot of yoga teachers that I work with, there are things that they just accept as this is the way it has to be. This is the way I have to be teaching. This is the way I have to feel. There's no way out of feeling this way. And some of it's their own internal conditioning from their past history. And some of it, quite honestly, is a lot of what they pick up when they speak to other teachers or they go to other classes. And, it's funny, I had a conversation just yesterday with a teacher when I did my workshop, and she said, we were talking about sequencing, and I was nudging the teachers there to really experiment with teaching a similar sequence from class to class as a way to get really comfortable teaching it. But there's always this fear that comes from this false belief that if we teach a similar sequence, people will be bored, even though no one's ever said that to us. And it's just this thing that's out there. And so this one teacher said to me, well, if I experiment and I teach a similar sequence from class to class, and she literally said to me, am I allowed to change maybe the beginning point? And I was like, you can do whatever you want. Like the barometer should be, do you go in and teach and feel confident? It shouldn't be, am I allowed to? Like you're driving the car, like
Yeah.
no one else is driving the car. And so one of the things I'm wondering is, and this is a lot of what I see, it's that seeking permission. Can I do this? And I sort of feel like that's baked into the yoga industry. Yoga teachers are trained in a lot of ways to rights and wrongs. So they sort of feel like if they're not having a great experience, they're trapped in this particular way of presenting yoga, and they don't have any what is not self-will. They don't have any authority or self-authority to do what they want. What that whole idea of seeking permission, it's not really people pleasing, it's more seeking. What is that based in? Like, what in your thoughts is that? Or is there like a counter avatar to that? That's sort of like, I don't know, some priestess that would like swat down, like, I don't need these rules, like something that they could connect to in those moments to say, you know what, I can do what I want in service to going in and teaching this class in a way that I know will be a confident way to present it, and that will serve them. I don't need anybody's okay to do it in a particular way. Is there something they can call on that sort of speaks to that?
Yeah, well, first, I think many women have that because that's the good girl archetype. That is what we were raised to follow the rules, to
Okay.
like make sure we're doing, checking our boxes, to getting everything,
So that's the thing, that's like a persona.
It's a persona. It's like, I'm going to stay safe, and it's probably a nervous system response too. If I do everything exactly the way that I'm supposed to do it, then I will be safe,
But you know
right?
what's so crazy about that when you look at yoga teaching is you can do everything according to what you think is the right way and still feel awful after class. But even in that feeling awful, it's like that Einstein quote, you'll do it over and over again. Like the level of thinking that got you to doing it that way will have you keep doing it that way, despite the negative feelings you have, out of allegiance to what you're talking about, this good girl persona.
Yeah, so I think the counter is probably the priestess or the wise woman. You can think of like Mary Magdalene, someone who's like, I am my own teacher. I am like my own guru. So in thinking too that, I mean, I think this is true whether you're a yoga teacher, whether you're an entrepreneur, people want to be around you because of your energy. That, it's like how you are going to show up is going to be so much more important than
Yes.
whether you sequenced everything correctly. So, and I know that's a hard step and we all want to just tell me what to do. I can
Yeah.
look at it in my business. I'm like, I just give me the roadmap. Tell me what it is that I'm supposed to do. But really what we need to do is like cultivate a state of being. That's what people want. That's what they want. They want you to guide them based on what you are feeling at that moment. And you might feel a little differently from class to class. So of course, like instead of trying to follow rules or guidelines, tapping into your own intuition. And I think like going back to the divine feminine, that's something we all need to be taught. We value reason and analysis over like how something feels or what I want right now. And that's also getting back to your desire. How do you want to teach the class today? Like what would feel good to do?
Yes. Yes. I love that. And I love when you just said getting back to, because when I teach this framework, the first thing I start with is mission. Like, why are you teaching? What's inspiring you to be a teacher? Why are you even doing this? And when you start from there, that allows everything else to flow from something that's authentically you versus something else that's outside of you. Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think one of the things that is challenging is exactly what you just described. All of the stuff that's on the checklist is very intellectual and is part of that paradigm that lives in this is what I was taught in teacher training or whatever you want to call it for whatever skill set or whatever profession or industry. This is the right way to do it. And when you counter that with, well, just tap into what you feel and blah, 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 that seems like it lives in the energetic realm. So I feel like people sort of poo-poo that and they want to lean more into the other because that seems somehow more right or more appropriate or more the right way to go. But doesn't that sort of lead them further away from what we're talking about?
It just, well, what I love about like your approach as far as like, have a sequence that you know really well, because you can have a sequence that you know really well, but like energetically, maybe there's a different way that you're going to teach it. There's a different way you're going to communicate it. And then you can focus more in the energy and you can kind of be with the studio. You can look at your students and see what they need. Do I need to make it a little faster, make it a little stronger? Do we need to step back today? So that's what I love about your approach, because then it's like you have a sequence and then the focus is the energy, which is where I believe that that's that connection point that you're going to have with the people.
Yes. Yes, totally. And I mean, you have so much experience with yoga, so I know that you know this from your own experience, but this is literally the conversation I had with someone today. Keep the architecture the same and think of a higher level overlay which could be just what you said, faster, slower, focusing on anatomy-based cues versus focusing on somatic cues or whatever else. They're just these little levers you're changing versus the entire architecture. And that, as you say, could be based on how you feel on that particular day or a theme that you want to carry through, but you're not retooling the whole thing. So every time you go in, you're back on your heels. I don't know what comes next.
Yeah, and I think that's a great approach. And I think that even if people thought about like, oh, what were their favorite yoga classes? They're going to remember, it's going to be more about how did that teacher show up? How did that teacher
Yes.
make me feel?
Yes. Yes. I love that you said this because literally between the last time we talked, which was just, I don't know, yesterday, the day before, and today, this morning, I had this like spiritual download because I've tried for the past couple of mornings to not look at my phone when I first wake up, and it's torturous, but I'm really trying to just stay in that space of waking up. And I had this, no kidding, I had this thought of I was trying to encapsulate in a phrase exactly what you're talking about, that teacher that walks in. And you and I know, because you and I go way back and practicing in the same studios. So I know a lot of like the yoga teacher avatars that you and I have been exposed to. If we kind of take the names off these people and just look at them as an avatar, I know you know what that looks like. And it came to me this morning, it's the it factor. It's a yoga teacher that has the it factor. And as soon as I thought it factor, I thought, but it's not about being popular. That's sort of a byproduct that comes. But a yoga teacher that has the it factor isn't seeking popularity. He or she is driven by exactly what you just said, that inner allegiance to following her own way of showing up. Does that sort of touch on some of what we're talking about in your mind?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's that inner allegiance, which is so powerful too. So, I'm thinking of like yoga teachers that would show up and they'd be a little crass and like swearing, but they were inner allegiance, but this class is great, and it would have like, and so it's like, it's back to your authenticity. Like now, if I was to show up to teach a yoga class, it would be like, what is she doing? Because that's not authentic. I don't really walk around swear, but it's like the person who's true to themselves and like, this is the
Yeah.
way to teach it is going
Yeah.
to have like dynamism.
Yes, I think of like Gary Vaynerchuk. He always curses, and he sometimes even says, people sometimes ask me if you're going to give a talk to my realtors or whoever, don't curse. And he's like, well, that's just part of what I do. That's part of how I express myself. Like, this is part of my authenticity, is being so passionate that sometimes these obscenities come out of my mouth. And I actually really like that. I like that he has the guts to just say, this is part of who I am. And it's not a judgy thing. It's just comes out in my passionate way of talking about topics that I'm passionate about. So I'm curious, and this sort of also piggybacks on a conversation I recently had with a teacher who's sort of in a little bit of she's kind of at a fork in the road in a way, like she can sort of take the path or continue to sort of be in this conditioning. And I know she's going to take the path because she's got enough seeds germinating in the fertile soil of possibility that it's definitely going to nudge her in the path. And at the same time, I'm thinking for her, and we had a little bit of a conversation around this in terms of like practices that she can do to feed that part of her that is all of what you're talking about, the tapping into your authentic way, the calling from these different avatars and different areas of history and literature and stuff. So maybe this comes out when you work with people on your end, what kinds of daily practices or weekly practices can people do to try to tap into all of what we're talking about here so that they can emerge kind of more in this authentic way?
Yeah. So that's a great question. And so I have a few answers. Let me think of which one to.
Because I know you also have Ayurveda in your background. So even just in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I know there's probably stuff there that you can call from. So you can kind of take it however you want.
Yeah. Well, one thing that just came up to me when you said that is when teachers are considering like, well, who do I want to be as a teacher? Like, how do I want to show up? And like, as you were talking about, like, what's my mission? Like, how to be integrity with that. So what does that require that you do in the morning? What is your morning practice like? Are you, getting up and turning on the news, or are you taking time to drink your water, to meditate, to do your own practice? So I think as we try to evolve and get into a bigger space, the biggest thing that is being integrity with it as well, because that's going to boost your confidence because you are walking the walk and you're talking the talk. So I think it's like, okay, if I'm going to be a yoga teacher and, this is going to be my mission, are you living that would be my first thing. Like how, because of course, if you're not living that, but yet you're trying to teach that, there's going to be a mix match. It's not going to feel good and you're not going to feel confident doing it. And that doesn't mean you have to be any certain way. It's just being how you want to be. Like we were just saying, if you want to cuss in class, fantastic. Like that's great. Just keeping it authentic to what it is that you teach, I would say would be one thing. So thinking about like, how does this person show up? How does this yoga teacher that I want to be, how does she spend her time? How does she spend her days? And we start titrating in to the type of teacher or the type of entrepreneur that we want to be by visualizing it. So spending some time each day too, just visualizing like, what is like in a year out, like, what do I want? How do I want to feel? What do my classes look like? Who are my students? And really kind of continuing to imagine that. Because I think often we think about the things that didn't go well or things happened in the back, but we actually have to be led by what it is that we want in the future as well. So keeping that clear. And I would say system, like just down regulating your nervous system, right? Whether it's pranayama, meditation, taking care of your body. And again, this goes back into am I going to show up in integrity? Am I doing the things that I am telling my students to do? So I think that's really the first one. And then if it is like, oh, I really want to work with an archetype, like I want to go into my classes really feeling like the creatrix or the healer or the priestess, learn about the archetype, learn about the different goddesses. Maybe if you have an altar, put some symbols that would represent, that type of archetype. Maybe you wear like a bracelet to kind of remind you to embody it as well too. But spend some time thinking about it. Like I think sometimes our attention is like such a scarce resource that we can have these great ideas like, oh, I'm going to show up as the creatrix, but then we don't put in the work to actually like, what does that look like? Like, well, what outfit should I wear to my yoga class if I'm going to be the creatrix? And like have fun with it as well too. Like not everything has to be so serious, like bringing in that element of play. So if I'm going to go into my class and like, yeah, like how do I want to present myself? What does a priestess look like teaching a class here? And like, yeah, is there a piece of jewelry that I can wear? But getting playful about it as well too. And like really figuring out like, how would I show up as this archetype?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I use the word integrity a handful of times as well, because I feel like the path to being whatever it looks like to you as the most amazing yoga teacher possible for you is really driven by your own integrity. Because I always say there's no yoga police. Like there's nobody that's really going to be in your classes like the IRS, like you're messing up or you're not meeting our standards. Yoga Alliance is really a hands-off organization, so it runs on the honor system. So if the teacher doesn't have that inner self-drive, that can sometimes stall some of this development. And I think one of the things that comes up though is, when you were saying about the visualization, which I think can be so powerful, what do you do when in the process of visualization, there's that inner critic that's telling you, oh, you can't do that. Like the example you gave of the teacher who wants to experiment with being the creator, and then nothing really comes of it. Maybe she has the desire, but that inner programming is so strong, telling her, who do you think you are going in wearing jewelry? You don't wear jewelry. You never grew up wearing jewelry. Who are you to wear some sort of like spiritual new agey kind of ring or bracelet? That's not who you are. So how do you sort of get into that lightness to just give yourself like a nudge forward to do it?
Well, one is to start to recognize the inner critic and not fuse with it, you know? So like, if you have that voice in your head, like I name mine like Judge Judy, it's like, okay, there's that part of me that's like telling me I suck and telling me why I'm not good enough. But you start to differentiate from it. Like you can choose not to believe it, remembering everybody has that inner critic. And the inner critic is very binary. It's like, you can't do that. So you're curious, like, well, why can't I? Like, why can't I show up? So it's not about saying like, no, I'm the best priestess or I'm the best yoga teacher ever. We're not trying to like have this false sense of confidence, but we're trying to make a sense of curiosity. Like, well, why? Like, why can't I show up like this? Or like, you know, so the inner critic is very black and white. It's very binary. You can't, and it's also very mean. So we can start to recognize it that way. And, you know, again, we're not trying to put on these airs of false confidence, like I'm the best. It's more of like, but why couldn't I? What would it look like if I did? You know, asking more of those open-ended, curious, like, how could I experiment with this? Like, how could I like take my wardrobe and become a priestess with the clothes that I already have? Like, what would that look like? So it has more of it's more of a curiosity, and it's more of how can we get this done instead of why we can't.
Yeah, I'm curious, is there a avatar in all of what we're talking about that embodies that inner, like you call it Judge Judy, but because I find that inner critic when I talk to a lot of yoga teachers that I work with that have that, and just like you say, just about everybody does, it is very rigid and it is very right, wrong. And so anything that gets filtered through that, well, I have to do it this way because I have to do it that way because. And is there any avatar that represents that in any of what is out there? You know, like if somebody doesn't resonate with Judge Judy, or, you know, because I like the idea of naming it, because you can almost say in your day-to-day, you know, Judge Judy, I'm not listening to you right now. Is there any avatar that represents that?
Think of like a specific avatar that represents that. I mean, if we were like looking at Buddhism, maybe it would be like Mara would be like, you know, kind of just throwing, you know, insults and, you know, just naming it. Maybe it's the mean girl from high school, you know, that you want to name it, or maybe it's like a character. But I think having that, making it silly a little bit, I recommend, so you don't take it so seriously, right? So like taking just naming that voice based on maybe it sounds like somebody else. A fun activity can actually even be to, right? Because what we really want to do is decouple from it and recognize that we hear this voice. This isn't me. It's not my intuition. It's not my inner wisdom. It's not my inner priestess. It's just this aspect of me. Like, draw it, make it a funny little character and give it a name. So then when you start to hear it, you know, you can start to say like, okay, thank you for that feedback, but you know, actually I'm going to try this, and we can start to form a relationship with it without fusing with it and pretending like, oh, this is just my inner wisdom, because your inner wisdom wouldn't talk like that.
Yeah. I remember I was listening to Peter Attia on one of his podcasts, and I had read his book, and he talked about he went through a very, very difficult time for many, many years dealing with inner rage that stemmed from being sexually abused. And he went through several different bouts of attempts at therapy. And what really helped him was this one sort of last ditch effort. And part of the therapist's approach with him was that anytime he would have this inner critic start to speak to him, he would have to either call his therapist, had some sort of special phone line where he could record a message, and he would basically record what he was listening to, like that negative voice. And then I think there was even a piece where he would record what he would say if it was a friend who was saying to him, this is how the friend was feeling, he would sort of say back like what he would say to a friend. So it was kind of a way for him over several weeks of doing these recordings to hear, I think it was either hearing how he would talk to himself, which was of course the negative, and how he could be more compassionate to himself. I can't remember which scenario it was, but in either case, it really helped him bring to the surface exactly what you're talking about, the voice of this inner critic, which is just what you said. We would never speak to another person like this. So the fact that we speak to ourselves like this is just kind of a interesting way to think about how we treat ourselves sometimes and how the psyche works as a way to kind of, I guess, protect us from changing in a more positive way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, can you imagine saying to like your friend, like, you're not a very good teacher. You can't do that. You shouldn't
Right,
even, we would never do that.
right,
And
right.
yeah, I mean, I think the inner critic does try to protect like a very vulnerable part of us, probably like a very small, young part of us that's very
Yeah,
nervous about being rejected. So the
yeah,
inner critic is trying to keep us sit like just, but the inner critic would also just have us sitting on the couch, eating bonbons, watching
right.
daytime television all day because it's perfectly safe there, right? We're not going to put ourselves up for any emotional risk, but that's not what this experience is about as well. We're here to evolve. We're here to
Right.
learn. Yeah, we are going to be vulnerable if we get up in front of a class of people and we put
Yeah,
ourselves, there is that sense of vulnerability, but that doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it wrong. It makes it human. It makes it worth doing too. So I
yeah.
was looking at it
Yeah,
that.
I love when you said earlier about sort of like the divine intervention coming down and saying to certain people, you have this attraction to doing this. You wouldn't have gone through a teacher training program if there wasn't, like, plenty of people will say, I signed up for teacher training to get better at yoga, and halfway along the way, I realized I wanted to be a teacher. And that's a perfect illustration of that. They didn't even go into training with that intention. And now they're done with training and they realize, wow, I really do want to teach. And I love that you brought that up because I feel like it's not that it lets people off the hook. It's almost like, and I don't want to make it seem separate, like it's a better than thing, but I like the idea of you've been called to do this. And so with that calling comes a need to sort of step up and a huge opportunity to be a vessel through which this, amazing practice can be, like you said, shared with other people.
Yeah, no, I love that. Elizabeth Gilbert has this book, Big Magic, where she talks about ideas as not ours, but gifts from the divine, and that we're their
Yeah.
stewards. So it's almost like that. If someone's being called for teacher training, there's a reason for that. And it's like, okay, how are you going to steward this
Yeah.
idea, this new evolution of you into life as well, too? So it's almost like a sense of taking that sense of responsibility. And
Yeah, yeah, I love that book. I actually pulled it out the other day. I was like, I really should reread this book because it's got a lot of those messages in it, and I just love it. Um, the other thing, oh God, I just lost the thought I was going to say. Anyway, I can't remember. The one thing that I want to do, and I'm just mindful of time because I remember you had mentioned something about the timing. I just want to ask you along this train of thought of like being nurturing and compassionate to yourself, especially while I have you here and you do have an Ayurvedic background. We could have a whole other podcast about that. Maybe we will set that up as a second piece, part two. I'm just wondering though, in the last few minutes here, is there anything that lives in the Ayurvedic world that is a nurturing practice that you could suggest for this sort of thing? Like if you're sort of embarking upon this, okay, I'm really going to be in service to feeding my authentic self, to being more bold and doing this sort of work to maybe examine some of these avatars, buy your book, dive into this sort of stuff. What's like a practice from Ayurveda that goes along with that?
sure. I'm going to give like just kind of high level and then I'll like
Yeah.
just break it down. So Ayurveda and the concept is dinacharya, which is your daily routine. And it's more than a daily routine, though. It's a proclamation of how you want to live your life, right?
Yeah.
And within the daily routine, the times of the morning and the evening are really these beautiful times where Ayurveda would say we want to protect our consciousness because there are liminal times when the veil between spirit and matter is at its thinnest. So I would really think as you were embarking on this, like one thing to really for like to create that sense of self-compassion, to create that sense of where am I going to go, is to protect those times of when you wake up in the morning, whether it's 30 minutes and you want to do some journaling, you want to do some meditation, but really protecting the time. And then evening, reflecting on what went well. Maybe you want to celebrate 3 things in your journal or you want to take a nice bath. but really kind of protecting these liminal times and thinking about how you want to start and end your day. Like in Ayurveda, it's like how you start your day is really going to represent like how your day is going to go, how your week is going to go, how your life is going to go. And then the evening represents death. Like, okay, are you happy with how you showed up, with how you experienced the world that day? So I would say, even if it's just 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening, but really protecting the consciousness and doing these self-enhancing practices, whether it's meditation, journaling, taking a bath, but just bookmarking your day. And then it's like the rest of the day, you can deal with the karma of your day. But I love having a really nurturing morning routine and evening routine.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I can say that has been, one of the things that has changed me. I try to really not book anything before noon so that I have a little extra space to really do that kind of thing. I know it's obviously different for everyone, and I'm sure somebody listening is going to have lots of reasons why that in their mind is not possible for them. I sort of feel like even if it's 5 minutes, it's still devoting some time to it. So I would just say, if that's the situation, even 5 minutes is still in honor to. And I think too, Mel Robbins said this recently when I heard her speaking, it maybe sometimes it means get up 15 minutes earlier. So you have, that time. And I feel like that sort of pays off in spades. The times that I do get up earlier, even though I might be a little tired, it pays off in spades as the day goes on. That 15 minutes earlier I got up, there's so many other things I'm doing well that day that I wouldn't have if I had slept an extra 15 minutes, which is really nothing.
Yeah,
So
no, I agree. And I would even say, like, even before getting out of bed, like, just one of my favorite, hand in the heart, like, what do I want this day to be about? Like, how
yeah,
do I, like, and maybe it's just like a word, like, I want to approach things with a little more
yeah,
ease. I want to add a little bit more playfulness into my interactions. Or maybe you have a difficult, like, conversation. Like, I want to show up in my truth. I want to feel strong. But just kind of having an intention, hand on the heart about, like, how I'm going to exist in the world today.
yeah. And that anybody can do. That takes no time. I mean, that's a no-brainer. So I actually will begin doing that. That's fantastic. Well, let's do this. Why don't you tell people again the name of your book and where? I mean, obviously they can just go on Amazon, but just tell us the name of the book again. I'll include it in the show notes, but I just want to catch while people are listening.
Sure. Yeah, it's The Goddess Solution. It was published by HarperCollins. You can get it at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I'm not sure where physical retailers are at. So online, though, you can get it anywhere online.
Got it. And then tell people about any upcoming trainings you have, free trainings, anything along those lines that you want to tell people about.
So I have a free training coming up. It's a 3-day live training on March 26th through the 28th, and it's
Okay.
called Midlife Magic Spring Body and Spirit Spring Renewal. And this
Got
training is all about like Ayurveda and how we can care for our bodies and celebrate the different seasons, because as women, we are very cyclical creatures. And this is going to, with this training, is all about how we can reconnect with the rhythms of our body and also with the cycles of the season, so we can really reclaim that vitality and restore our radiance.
Fantastic. That sounds great. And that's 3 days in the middle of, I wrote down the dates, 3/26 to 3/28.
Yes.
All right. And I will include links in the show notes to my episode, to your book, and to that training so that people, and your website and your Instagram, so that people have multiple ways to get in touch with you. Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This was so much fun and so timely. I'm just feeling like this was really divine intervention for us to reconnect, because a lot of these themes are just coming up a lot in the work that I do. And it's a lot of the topics I want to share with people that I'm connected with. So I really appreciate you speaking out of your expertise on all these wonderful topics.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I know I love this conversation as well. So yeah, this was just such a fun conversation to have. So thank you.
Cool. Sure thing. And this will go live on Monday. I'll send you the link and we'll get this up and out there so people can listen to it and benefit from it. So, well, thank you again, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And as a special thanks, DM me the words podcast offer, and I'll share with you a special opportunity for yoga teachers who are ready to be confident and skilled and drop all that prep time, drop practicing with class, drop using the same cues over and over, and drop worrying what other people think. If this is you and you're ready to step into your most powerful, authentic way of teaching, DM me the words podcast offer on my Instagram, Bare Bones Yoga.